Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Meesha.
Welcome to another episode of North Atlanta Real Estate with Jeff Ahi and Meesha Rawal.
All right. So today, I guess we're going to talk about the exhibits and contingencies that we'd find on the page 9 of our purchase and sale agreement that we talked about, I guess, in a previous episode.
Absolutely. And this is the Georgia Association for Realtors Purchase and Sales Agreement F201 for anybody who is interested.
Okay, very good. And so I guess what we'll cover about is, why don't we talk about first kind of the ones that are most commonly found in almost all of our agreements. And that would kind of go into these categories of financing. You have some type of financial contingency. Then usually you'll have a seller property disclosure and a community association disclosure. You might have a legal description separate from the one you find on the first page. And then you're going to have the buyer's compensation agreement.
Absolutely. So when you go to page 9, you'll see about 20 little check boxes, and you don't have to fill up all of them.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
We'll go over the main important ones and then also touch upon certain unique situations.
Yeah, that sounds great. So as we just spoke of, why don't we talk about the financial ones that we would commonly find? Probably the most common one would be a conventional financing exhibit. And then closely behind that, since we do have a lot of cash purchases in our area still, we would have a no financial contingency or all cash exhibit. It can be referenced either way. And then some that are a little less used right now would be an FHA loan exhibit, Federal Housing Authority exhibit, VA loan exhibit, that would be for our veterans, and then a USDA loan exhibit, which would be for folks that are of certain income and for certain areas.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And conventional loan exhibit, which is F404, when you look at the loan disclosure, you will see that it has a financial appraisal contingency. And a financial contingency and an appraisal contingency. You could leave them as zero if you decide you don't want to have an appraisal contingency and you don't want to have a financing contingency, but it is always encouraged by the lenders and by the agents to have some sort of contingencies, because those are your safety nets in the state of Georgia, which protect you as a buyer.
And I guess some of the reasons where we would have zero is when we're coming out of this very competitive market where you're trying to win bids. Sometimes this was a technique that some of the buyers were using to try to make their offer stand out.
Absolutely. Typically, an appraisal contingency is for 14 days, and that also is similar for the financing contingency, because an appraiser would take about 2 weeks to go to the house, appraise it, and send across the report.
And basically what that is for folks is, what it says is in the agreement is, if for some reason that the home doesn't appraise for at least the contract price or more, what ends up happening is you as the buyer have the right to go back to the seller, ask for a price reduction of whatever amount, can be all the way down to the appraisal, or and if the seller doesn't agree to it, you as a buyer can terminate the agreement if you choose to. Another thing that typically happens or is common is sometimes there's a negotiated agreement between the buyer and seller somewhere in the middle on the price.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And same with the financing appraisal, because let's say you decide to buy your wife a Mercedes or a giant boat for yourself, and now your lender comes back and tells you, hey, I'm sorry, you can't get finance for this house. Now you can back out of the contract with no penalties if you have a financing contingency. Now, if you do not, what ends up happening is you lose your earnest money.
Yeah.
And to protect your earnest money, we have all these safety nets.
Yeah, very good. And so after we've talked about our financial contingencies, I guess we referenced the seller property disclosure, which is where we're going to find the seller talking about in detail their knowledge of the property and any problems they've had. And then a community association disclosure. And what do we usually find on that, Meesha?
Yeah, it's so important for sellers to spend some extra time filling out these seller's property disclosure and community association disclosure and not have any errors or oversights, because there are times that you had a water leak 10 years ago, but you completely forgot to mention it in the seller's property disclosure. So in order to not have any legal ramifications in the future, it's better to fill it to the best of your knowledge. Same thing with the community association disclosure. If you have the HOA bill, which comes out monthly, annually, or quarterly, definitely fill that out. And also any special assessments, because anything that is not disclosed in the community association disclosure has to be paid by the seller at the closing table. So you don't want that.
Yeah, and oftentimes sellers may not be aware that there's something called a capital contribution. So the new buyer may have to pay a fee equal, oftentimes it'll be like the full year's worth of dues, or sometimes much more. And another one like that, sometimes there's just something they call transfer account fees. They just throw in some junk fees.
Absolutely.
And so all that has to be disclosed.
Yeah, a forgetful seller is great for a buyer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So if you're a buyer, you definitely want the seller to forget to put all these fees in. But if you're a seller, please put those fees in.
Yeah, so now let's talk about Form F-259, the buyer brokerage compensation form. And this is where I guess it's spelling out how the agents are going to be paid. So
yeah, and this started on August 17th with the huge
of 2024, I think,
of
right?
2024, because before this, the FMLS and the Georgia MLS, the two big MLSs in our area, used to display what the buyer's agent would be compensated in terms of percentage. Now, you cannot disclose what the compensation is going to be. So every offer has to have the buyer brokerage compensation exhibit attached to it, because it allows both the seller and the buyer to know how your buyer agent is being compensated.
Yeah, so before August 17th, almost everything was transacted where the listing agent would meet with the seller and they would agree with compensation for the listing broker's compensation, and then the broker would share that with the buyer's agent. That's how almost all transactions were done. Now we find that still happens, so you can still have it done that way, but now we're also finding a large number of times that the seller is just paying his listing broker one fee, and now when the buyer's making an offer, we're having to ask for compensation from the seller to pay the buyer's broker fee. Yeah?
Absolutely, and you want that to be as transparent as possible, because if the seller or the seller's broker do not adequately compensate your agent, there's a possibility that your agent might come back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And the buyer then is going to be, I guess, responsible for some portion that is not covered, right?
Absolutely. So it's always good to have that sent in with the purchase and sales contract. Now, as the market is softening, like we've discussed in the past few episodes, you may see a little more of the sale or lease of buyer's property contingency exhibit, which is the F601.
Yeah, so this is an exhibit that after COVID, when the market started heating up, you as a buyer could almost never get an offer accepted if you said, hey, look, I have to sell my house over there. I need to do that and close that first, and then I can buy your house. That just would never get accepted. And so we haven't seen these lately, but prior to that, it was common, and we're going to see it again to be more common, where a buyer says, hey, look, the market's slowing down. I don't want to be committing to buy this house over here unless I know I'm going to be able to sell my house. I can't end up with two mortgages. That's a thing. Nobody wants to end up with that. And so now, as the market slowed down, you can't depend on it selling in a week. Now buyers are going to be saying, hey, look, I would like to buy your home, Mr. Seller, but I need to know that mine is going to close first. And it's either you might have to have it closed first to qualify for your mortgage, or you just must need it for your peace of mind.
Absolutely.
So that's going to come back, absolutely.
And in certain areas, it's called being in Hubbard.
Yeah.
So, and then you as a buyer will have that kick-out clause saying that if your house does not sell and you're unable to complete this transaction, and the seller finds a competitive offer, they will kick you out of this contract and go ahead with the other purchase offer that comes in.
Yeah, and so that's an option on these forms. You as a buyer would love to negotiate it so there is no kick-out clause. And if you're able to sneak that through, that's very good for you. If there becomes a kick-out clause in it, like you say, then you are subject to losing the home if someone else comes along.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another exhibit, which is the backup agreement.
Yeah. So I've always counseled my folks as a buyer, if you made an offer on a home and you lost out the bid to someone else and you still want the home, it doesn't cost you anything to put in place as a backup agreement. And what it basically says is, if that primary contract falls through for any reason, you immediately become the primary agreement. No more negotiation. It's already been negotiated. Everything's signed. So you're not going to lose it to another party that comes up later. And the nice thing about this is for the buyer, it costs nothing to enter into this agreement. You don't
It's
have to
not binding.
Right. It's only binding insofar as it binds the seller to those terms, but you as the buyer, if a new home comes on the market that you would like to go after, or if you just decide you don't want to buy a house at all, you can terminate that agreement at any point before it becomes the primary agreement.
So it's like a bird in the hand.
Yeah, I think it's and 15% of the time it works out. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you really, really like a house and you're in a multiple offer situation, and the seller has accepted an offer, by all means, go ahead and sign a backup contingency offer and not just leave it to a verbal interest or an email.
Absolutely. And so why don't we talk about a temporary occupancy agreement and when that might come up? When might we find that?
Absolutely. And these are all the backup contingency agreement and the temporary occupancy agreement are when you have a multiple offer situation and you want your offer to look lucrative. So you allow the seller to stay in the house for after closing. But it's always important to talk to your insurance agent and your insurance company during the due diligence period to see how much it's going to cost you as a buyer to allow the seller to stay in the house, because you will have to have the homeowner's insurance. And these days, insurance companies are getting a little strict about allowing temporary occupancy beyond a certain number of days.
Yeah, and the seller, I believe, has to get like a renter's policy at least to cover their personal possessions in the property, because they're not covered under the new buyer's insurance policy.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, in order to kind of do a little bit of wrap up, Jeff, what we talked about was when you send the purchase and sales contract, send in the financing, the legal description, the seller's property disclosure, community association disclosure, and definitely the buyer brokerage compensation agreement.
Absolutely. And then one final thing that we have is that it's not really part of the sales agreement, but it's a separate agreement, a bill of sale agreement. And what that is let's say you as the buyer, you wanted their refrigerator, washer, dryer, some blinds, some lawn furniture, whatever. That can go, you can even put the cat in there if you really got attached to it when you're looking at the house. You can put all that stuff in a personal property bill of sale. And it says with that bill of sale, it only is effective if the house closes. So you don't get all that stuff for free just because you made the offer. But if the house closes, then those items will transfer to the buyer.
And this is a gentleman's agreement between the seller and the buyer. The agents are not involved, which is the reason it's not part of the purchase and sales contract.
Yeah. So that's a pretty good overview. And I guess we can say that really anything specialized situation that comes up can be addressed by a contingency. If it's one that hasn't been commonly used, we can always reach out to one of our fantastic closing attorneys we use, and they'll help us craft one that's legally protective for our clients that handles a specific situation.
And if you have any questions about the contract, please feel free to reach out to Jeff Ahi and Meesha Rawal, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Till next time.